Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books presents Apocalypse by Kyle West, narrated by Graham Halstead. Chapter 1. My steps felt heavy as I walked the main corridor of Bunker 108, carrying my M4 and pack, a canteen, and 2 extra clips of 5.56mm ammunition. The large vault door at the end of the tunnel, embossed with the number 108, stood as a barrier I had never been allowed to cross. But in mere minutes, I'd step through on my first trip outside. Behind the security desk at Bunker 108's entrance, Captain Deborah Green watched the camera feeds intently, not breaking her attention when I stopped a few feet from the door. At first glance, with her glasses and gray hair, she seemed to belong more in the archives than out here, but one look at her steely face was enough to dash that notion. I sighed, trying to push down my nervousness, but wasn't entirely successful. Anytime you went out of Bunker 108, you never knew if you were coming back. Outside the bunker was the wasteland, and the stuff of nightmares. Dust storms, deadly cold, and worst of all, people who would kill without a second thought. It was all the result of the impact of the meteor Ragnarok in 2030, and in the 30 years since, the wasteland had only grown more dangerous. It was my responsibility to go on recons, just as it was for everyone of age. When a citizen turned 16, he or she was deemed old enough to start reconnoitering. Names were placed in a lottery, and once every week, a single name was drawn to reconnoiter with an officer. This continued every week until every name had been drawn, at which point all the names were re-entered and the whole process repeated. There was one exception, however. Every new person added to the pool was obligated to go on a first run. Since yesterday had been my 16th birthday, there had been no lottery for me this week. I would be doing my first run with Officer Michael Sanchez. It wasn't like I had nothing to be scared about. 2 years ago, there had been an incident with a recruit named Jake Spears, who died on his first run. He would have been 18 this year. He and his recon partner, an officer named Philip Cohen, were killed after getting into a firefight with raiders. While any death was tragic, this was the first time a 16-year-old had died on a first run. I still remembered the resulting uproar. A unified citizens' council had demanded Chief Security Officer Chan cease the practice of first runs, reserving recons only for officers and volunteer citizens who were at least 18 years of age. But when it came down to it, Chief Security Officer Chan had more teeth. The measure never passed. The officers backed Chan, and the officers carried a lot of clout on council. Some of my classmates actually looked forward to their first runs. I'd been dreading mine for months. To them, I supposed seeing the outside world with their own eyes was worth the risk of getting killed. With me, it was different. I wasn't a soldier, nor did I want to become one, which was something I couldn't say for a lot of my peers. Someday I hoped to become a scientist and a doctor, like my dad. I liked helping him in the research lab when he could spare the time to teach me. After today's run, all I had to do was get through the next lotteries. It took a while to have your name drawn once you'd completed your first run. Years, if you were lucky. Officer Michael Sanchez appeared down the corridor, laughing and joking with one of his officer buddies. They clapped hands, parted, and he continued his way up the corridor. Michael was tall, heavily muscled, with skin bronzed from regular light baths. Every citizen was allowed 15 minutes for their daily production of vitamin D, but officers were allowed more time. Having a tan was a sign of status. The CSO gave a number of other perks to the officers, such as more credits and cushier apartments. Because they laid their lives on the line, Chan said they deserved more compensation. I was sure the CSO had other reasons, the most important being that it secured his power base. If you had the officers behind you, you effectively had the bunker behind you. At last, Michael approached, beaming a wide smile. "Ready to roll?" I shrugged, trying not to look as nervous as I felt. "Ready as I'll ever be." "What? That's no attitude to have. Trust me, we'll make a legend out of you. You'll be the toast of mess tonight." I smiled. "We'll see about that." All right, let's move. You're late, Sanchez. Michael spun on his heels to face Captain Green. Sorry, Captain, he said, standing to attention. It won't happen again. She raised a quizzical eyebrow, but didn't press the point. Time is 1600. Good luck. You're due back in 2 hours. Captain Green reached under her desk, and a moment later the resounding click of metal echoed through the corridor. Seemingly unaffected by the loud reverberation, Michael pulled the massive door outward, the metal groaning as it swung open. We weren't outside. Not yet. An entry tunnel with an earthen floor bathed in weak fluorescent lights sloped upward about 50 yards, ending at the final vault door. Cool, dry air swirled into the staging area. The difference was heavy and foreboding, and it felt like nothing I could put a word to. Alex? I turned, surprised to see my dad standing behind Michael and me, his lab coat wrinkled and his brown hair disheveled. He was a tall and lanky man, far taller than most anyone, besides some of the officers. Dark circles underlined his hazel eyes, which were only partially hidden by black-rimmed glasses. The 100-hour weeks he spent doing research definitely showed. In fact, it looked as if he hadn't slept in days. Sorry, I meant to make it here earlier. I got involved in decoding a new genetic sequence and... He shook his head. I'm sorry, Alex. It's fine, I said. I know your work is important. I know, but I should have been here. I meant to be here. He nodded as if confirming that. Before you leave, I want you to know, you'll do fine. Remember your training and listen closely to Officer Sanchez. He's in good hands, Dr. Keener, Michael said. Since you're going with him, I believe it, my dad said. I was worried about who he'd be partnered with. I'm glad to hear that. We'll make a soldier out of him in no time. My dad turned to Captain Green, giving her a nod. Forgive the interruption, Captain. By all means, Dr. Keener. Take your time. As she looked at me, the features of her face softened, and something in her eyes seemed to acknowledge that this might be the last time my dad and I saw each other. Good luck, Alex, my dad said. I'm proud of you. I couldn't bring myself to respond, which was stupid considering how dangerous going outside was. All I could manage was a terse nod, which made me feel bad. I knew my dad deserved better. Before I had the chance to make things right, Michael was shutting the interior door, and a moment later, the massive steel door separated us, echoing into silence. Michael looked at me, seeming to have missed the awkward parting. He and I started up the tunnel. It wasn't as if I didn't want to respond. My dad and I had always had an unusual and sometimes strained relationship. In fact, it sometimes felt as though we weren't a real family. He was so busy with his research, his medical practice, and his high-ranking responsibilities as a member of the Citizens Council that, outside of the time I helped him in the lab, we rarely saw one another. People often said that my dad hadn't always buried himself in his work. I sometimes wondered whether his change in work habits had coincided with my mom's death, which happened on the day I was born. He had been the one delivering me, and it was easy to imagine that guilt eating away at him for years. Growing up, I'd always been envious of the kids who had 2 parents and siblings. As I grew older, I became more successful at pushing down those feelings, but sometimes they still lurked. As Michael and I continued up the tunnel, I knew I had to push these thoughts from my mind. It felt as if we were on our way to another world, and I needed to be 100% present for whatever was to come. The dusty dirt floor and rock walls were lit with a pale yellow glow from the overhead lights. Our footfalls were strangely muted in the tunnel's dim confines, and the final vault door to the wasteland approached all too quickly. Remember, Michael said, if we come upon anybody, shoot first, whether they're raiders or not. Just assume they are. No questions asked. I nodded. This was standard protocol. Rather than risk discovery, we had orders to eliminate anyone we found. I knew how to shoot well enough. Every citizen, regardless of status, was required to perform at least an hour's practice each week with the laser rifles. practice weapons that even simulated the kick of our standard-issue M4s. Ammunition was far too precious to waste on practice, and preserving the bunker's vast quantity of rounds was one of the many factors the government had tasked the security agency with. While the impact of Ragnarok itself had been devastating, I learned in class that it was really the aftermath that had sent the world's population tumbling toward extinction. There were the initial effects of the impact, massive earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and the dust being kicked into the atmosphere. Much of the sunlight that once reached the surface was now reflected by that dust, leaving our world much colder than it had been. The dust also refracted light, causing the sky to always be red, even at noon on a midsummer day. It would take decades, if not centuries, for the dust to finally settle. Under such conditions, it didn't take long for mass agriculture to fail, not just in the United States, where the meteor had struck on the border of Nebraska and Wyoming, but worldwide. Mass agriculture was the branch upon which all industrialized society had hung. When that branch was sawn off, it inevitably led to mass extinction and the complete disintegration of civilization. Estimates ranged anywhere from a 75% kill rate on the low end to a 99% kill rate on the high end. However, experts surmised that the bulk of survivors, if any, were concentrated in equatorial regions, which could have been more protected from extreme global cooling. It was unknown whether other parts of the world had fared better or worse than the United States. However, it was common knowledge that other countries had their own survival housing programs, though the United States bunker program was touted as the most extensive, at 144 bunkers. When Michael and I reached the final vault door, I shifted in my gear, causing my hand to hit the barrel of my M4. The feel of the rifle's cold metal made me realize that it was the shoot-first policy that I was most nervous about, not the cold, dry wind, the dead world, the red, hazy sky stretching above, or the lack of a sun dimmed out by layers of meteor dust. Before opening the door, Michael checked his radio to ensure it was all set. Satisfied, he looked ahead at the final barrier between the bunker and the outside world. Large, bold numbers, 108, were pressed into the thick metal. For my entire 16 years, that door had served as the barrier between safety and danger, known and unknown. This wasn't a video, and it wasn't a picture. I'd be seeing the wasteland with my own eyes. Michael twisted the lock wheel, his muscles bulging beneath his desert camo. The wheel groaned as it gave, little by little. Finally, the door opened with a clang. Michael pulled it inward until the wasteland outside stood revealed. The natural light, though dim, still blinded me. A rush of cold, dry wind met my face, forcing me to raise a hand to shelter my eyes from the dust. The first thing I saw were distant red mountains, like upside-down, bloody teeth. In front of the mountains stood crimson dunes that looked as if they belonged on Mars rather than Earth. A dilapidated, rusted crane lay half-buried, maybe half a click out where it had lain since December 3rd, 2030. Dark day. The day when most of humanity and most of life had been set on the path toward extinction. "Welcome," Michael said with a sardonic grin, "to the wasteland." Chapter 2. I followed Michael down the gravelly slopes of Hart Mountain, pulling my hood forward to keep out the cold. Late September in Southern California meant freezing temperatures almost every night. Though I'd seen countless pictures of the wasteland before, I couldn't help but take it in with numb shock. All vegetation was short, clinging for life in the sandy, cracked earth. What I was seeing was far removed from the California of the movies, stored in the archives. I often dreamed of a hot, sandy beach, the blue ocean and sky, the bright sun without a cloud to bar its light. I loved watching those movies and wished I had been born 100 years ago and not in 2044. Each bunker was a closed system, meaning everything had to be supplied internally, be that food, power, or water, and all those resources had to be recycled. Things had been going well for the bunkers, at least for a while. but that all changed when Bunker 1 went offline. Bunker 1, located in Cheyenne Mountain, Colorado, served as the headquarters of the United States government, and its fall set into motion the collapse of many others. That was in 2048, and President Garland had been among the thousands presumed dead in a bunker that had simply disappeared overnight. In the absence of Bunker 1, most bunkers had decided to go their own way. Bunker 108 was almost completely isolationist, and that had been CSO Chan's policy since the day he'd taken over. No one could fault the CSO for being too lax on the security front. In fact, many members of the Citizens Council believed Chan was too draconian. At the same time, though, everyone agreed that Chan was the reason we were still alive. Michael and I didn't talk as we picked our way down the mountain. Each recon took a different path, which prevented trails from being formed. Wastelanders didn't come out this way much. This stretch of the San Bernardino Mountains was as forsaken as any, and that was exactly what the bunker designers had accounted for in their site planning. Still, I couldn't help but feel that danger lurked in the red, rugged landscape. "So, what's our objective?" I asked. "We're on a set route," Michael said. "Basically combing the valley to see what we can find." "What are we looking for?" "Signs of wastelanders. If any have been through, Chan will want to know." "Have you ever found anything?" "Personally, no, but someday it'll happen. Let's just say it keeps recons from ever becoming routine. The minute you believe it's routine, you'll wind up dead." Michael's warning gave way to silence as we trudged on into the valley. We were out of sight of home by now. Looking back, the mountain and its foothills were cast red by the crimson sky. I shivered as a particularly chilly gust hit me. Our feet crunched against dirt and rocks, stirring up clouds of dust. We passed a low red hill which brought a rounded metallic trailer into view, shimmering in the late afternoon haze. The trailer sat a few hundred yards away on a stretch of cracked flatland, and sandy hills rose on the horizon. "What's the trailer for?" I asked. "You'd think the fact it's here would give our bunker away." "It's for dust storms," Michael said. "You never want to be caught in one. It'll be the last mistake you make. As far as it giving us away, well, I guess the Wastelanders wouldn't know who put it here to begin with. It's locked, anyway. Contains rations, water, apparel, anything a patrol might need to weather a few days while waiting for the dust to settle." We paused before the trailer, Michael looking for anything out of place. Not knowing what to do, I focused on checking the ground for tracks. There was nothing visible, though. With that wind, I imagined any kind of imprints would be erased within a few hours. I used to question why we went on recons. My answer came last night when I received my briefing. While the bunkers had been designed to last decades, even centuries, it was unknown whether people could last that long. At some point, we were going to lose all our specialists, doctors, engineers, and teachers. Even if those skills were passed on to the next generation, there would be some inevitable loss of know-how. Repeat that enough generations, and we would resemble the wastelanders above. For this reason, we accepted that eventually a move to the surface would have to be made. That was the primary objective of the recons. The one Michael and I were on was meant to be short, but experienced officers were sent on more extended expeditions for the purpose of finding suitable places to settle. In the post-apocalyptic Mojave, however, those places were few and far between, and the prime spots had already been snatched up. That meant recons had to range further and further. This carried risks. Not only could we lose good men to the dangers of the wasteland, but one of our recons could be followed back. When I rejoined Michael, he was looking in the direction of Bunker 108. I didn't know why, but I assumed it was to see if we were being followed. "Let's wheel around Heart Mountain. We're taking the long route today." "What's the long route?" "It'll take us to the mountain's northern face. After that, we'll double back to the valley. There's a good view of the desert floor from the lookout." As we set course for the mountain, our conversation turned more personal. "Thought about your profession any?" "I'm going to be a researcher," Like my dad. He's already shown me a few things in the lab, so I think I have an advantage there."
"Well, that makes sense," Michael said. "I won't even try to convince you to become an officer. We need scientist types too, and God knows they're getting rare these days." He frowned. "I've always wondered why Dr. Keener was holed up here. Seems like 114 would be more his place."
"Bunker 114's pretty far," I said with a shrug. In truth, it wasn't that far, only 50 miles. However, 50 miles in the wasteland was a dangerous distance to cross. Besides, we've always lived in 108. It's home.
"Sure, there's that," Michael said. "But 114's the last bunker left that still does medical research. I've heard they have a whole complement of scientists there."
"I guess I've never thought about it. Transfers don't happen anymore. There aren't many places to transfer to these days. During the Dark Decade, the U.S. had built a lot of bunkers in the Mojave because of nearby L.A., San Diego, and Vegas. Bunker 108 and especially Bunker 114 were centers for xenobiological research, dedicating themselves to the study of the strange fungus and microbes that had emerged from the impact of Ragnarok. My dad's line of research was xenofungus, a purple and spongy substance that grew in his lab. I suppose the fungus was far more common out where Ragnarok had impacted, because all I could see out here were red hills and dust. Looking up, it was hard to imagine that sky ever having been blue. As we scaled the mountain, I thought of Michael and the difference in our ages and lives. Though we were 8 years apart, we had one thing in common. Neither of us had seen old Earth. We were both born underground in Bunker 108, and anyone 30 years old or younger could say the same. Bunker 108 had a population of about 400. Most of those who died in the last 30 years had been old. Some had been born underground, like Michael and me, but we weren't growing fast enough to replace those lost. When we arrived at the north face of Heart Mountain, I paused to glance at the distant red peaks. Being so used to the confines of the bunker, it was surreal to see so much open space. I wished we could stop so I could give the mountains a good long look, but Michael's pace made it all I could do to keep up.
"Jesus,"
Michael said, pulling to a sudden stop.
"What?"
As my eyes followed the direction of Michael's rifle, all of my fears manifested before me. Face down in front of us, partially hidden by some wispy scrub, lay a man stabbed several times in the back. Michael sprang into action, kneeling to the ground while motioning me to do the same.
"Quiet," he said. "There might be someone around."
Might be. There probably was. There was no way this man had stabbed himself in the back. Michael crawled closer, placing 2 fingers on the man's neck.
"There's a pulse," he said. "Keep an eye out, but stay right where you are. You don't want to make yourself a target."
It was easy to follow orders, but doing so made it hard to see anything from my position. A low rise blocked my line of sight to the north. We were a good quarter up the mountain, heightening our visibility from below. At the same time, the scrub and our camo would probably make us hard to pick out. I looked to the west and down the mountain slope. I saw nothing but rocks, more parched scrub and dust. I glanced back at Michael, wondering why he was checking the man's vitals instead of ending him. That was standard protocol. If you found a wastelander, you killed him. End of story. Then I realized the probable reason for his restraint. It would be insanely stupid to shoot a gun when others might be around waiting to end us. It was a moment later that I noticed the victim was wearing a gray jumpsuit, not dissimilar to the blue ones we sometimes wore in 108. Only on his jumpsuit, the number 114 was emblazoned on the sleeve. This man wasn't a wastelander. "Is he from that other bunker?" I asked. Rather than looking at Michael, my eyes looked up to focus on a boulder about 30 yards away. Something was off about it, and it only took me a second to realize what it was. A woman's face was peeking around its side. Chapter 3. I blinked, and the woman was gone. Had my eyes been playing tricks on me? The answer, I decided, wasn't relevant. Michael needed to know, and he needed to know now. Already he was digging into his pack for the first aid kit. "I think someone's out there, behind that rock." His reaction was instant. "Get down!" He lay prone on the ground, and I followed suit, my heart racing. He reached for the pair of binoculars hanging around his neck and raised them to his eyes. He watched the rock, saying nothing. "Do you see anything?" I asked. "You said you think you saw someone. Do you think, or do you know?" I hesitated. "Think." Michael looked toward the rock a few seconds more before lowering his binoculars to raise his carbine to his shoulder. The barrel poked out through the scrub, and he peered through the rifle's scope. "Where are you?" Michael muttered, his left eye closed. "It was a woman," I said. "Black hair, kinda pretty." Michael grunted. "Close enough for you to tell?" "That's all I can say for sure. Maybe I imagined it. I don't know." "Trust your gut, kid. If you don't—" Michael trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. "If she was there, she isn't now." "What if she knows where we are? The bunker, I mean." "Nothing we can do about that," Michael said. "At least for now." Slowly, Michael lowered his rifle to again pick up the first aid kit, pulling out a thin, squeezable tube. "Put some of this congealer on his wounds while I raise HQ, and keep an eye out for trouble." The small tube of ointment, unmarked by labels, had never been opened. I twisted off the cap before unzipping the man's coveralls to expose his back. It was completely coated with blood. The lacerations were deep, and it was all I could do to keep my stomach steady. I was no expert, but the wound seemed to have missed vital organs and arteries. I set to work while Michael raised the radio to his mouth. "Alpha Patrol to HQ. Do you have a copy? Over." As I squeezed the congealer directly into each of his wounds, Captain Green's voice poured out of the radio. "What did you find, Sanchez? Over." "We've sighted a hostile, and we've come upon a friendly with several stab wounds in the back. Over." The congealer worked quickly, already clotting the blood in the man's wounds. "What do you mean, friendly? You're the only personnel I authorized for this recon. Over." "He's a civilian from Bunker 114. I can tell because he's wearing one of their jumpsuits. He still has a pulse, but it's weak. I got Alex to congeal the wounds so he might be able to hold on a little while longer. Enough time to get him home to base, maybe, but we need backup. We lost sight of the hostile, but Alex is sure he saw her. Over." I zipped up the man's coveralls to keep him from being exposed to the bitter cold wind. We waited for Captain Green's response. "Officer Sanchez, please stand by for further orders. Over." Captain Green cut out, leaving us alone on the mountainside. "What now?" I asked. "We wait. She probably has to clear her next order with the CSO. In the meantime, stay out of sight and be ready for anything." We both lay with our rifles to our shoulders. Like Michael, I peered through the scope but saw nothing but red rocks and dirt, dimmed with dusk. Captain Green's voice came back. "State your location, Sanchez. Over." 2 miles on the long route, the final stretch before the lookout. Over." "Copy that. We have a team entering the tunnel right now. Are you in cover? Over." "Yeah, a slight depression with some scrub. Not perfect, but we can see anyone approaching from 100 yards or so. Over." "Keep the recruits safe, Sanchez," Captain Green said. "Team is out the door right now. Expect them in 15 minutes. Over and out." The sound of the wind blended with the sizzling static of the radio. Michael reattached it to his belt. "So, we wait some more." He again raised his rifle to his shoulder. "If he's from Bunker 114, what's he doing out here? It didn't sound like Captain Green expected him." "A good question," Michael said, lowering his rifle to check the man's pulse again. "It's one I've been wondering myself. One thing's clear, though. He'll be dead if he doesn't receive medical attention. We came along just in time. Enough to offer him a fighting chance, anyway." "How long ago do you think it happened?" "Not long at all. After all, you saw that Wastelander just a stone's throw away." I looked out at the spot where the woman had been, which was now lost in the shadow of the mountain. The sun glow had faded from over our shoulders, and what remained of the day was giving way to darkness. The woman, if she...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?